Are there many people who actually stayed through this almost 60 years that you're here? Or I guess many people left, many friends left? We have someone who stayed actually.
Yeah, most expatriates do leave, and that's economic. Many of them, when they came, they were given accommodation by the government in particular,
Yeah.
a huge group of people, but also people like Cathay Pacific or the bank in those days provided accommodation, provided rent. And the only way you can stay on in Hong Kong after you retire, after my husband retired, is to own your own place. To try and pay today's rental for a flat, even a small flat in Hong Kong, is high, very high. So from a very practical point of view, not that many people stay on. And I think, I would say almost everybody we know who stayed on managed to get their own place, often very early, like we did, when you could pick up a place for peanuts. Because we bought our house in 1971, and they say you should buy when there's blood on the streets. And that's pretty much what we did. It was the Cultural Revolution, the Red Guards and the bombs were still here. So many people who did as we did, we are the people who have been able to stay on. I think many more people would have liked to, but if you don't own your own place here, you can't.
Yeah. How many times it gets more expensive through the years? 100 times, something like that.
Well, it's. I think Hong Kong, I think Singapore and Hong Kong are both pretty expensive places, but I think Hong Kong is one of the most expensive places in the world. So we're just again very fortunate that we made that decision so many years ago, and we made it. We were renting a flat in town, and the landlord put up the rent by 100 Hong Kong dollars a month for the next 3 years, and 100 Hong Kong dollars is what, about 10 pounds, 10 US dollars, something like that.
Yeah.
Peanuts by today's standard. But I remember saying to my husband, $100 a month more for the next 3 years. Gosh, that's a bit much. We better buy a house. So we came, we saw this one, bought it that same day, that afternoon. A very big impulse decision, which has served us well. The best thing we ever did financially, but also it's an oasis because we're surrounded by trees and bushes and green. Yeah. It's just an oasis for when I go out and fight with the industry. And people love coming out to us because many of our friends do live in apartments. So to come out and be able to sit in the garden and just be surrounded by, the peace and the quiet and the birds. You probably are picking it up on your recording with the birds all around us. It's just lovely. We're really lucky.
Yeah, it's beautiful and lovely. When you bought it, it was a bit maybe far away from the city center, but now it's like just 20 minutes.
It is.
Drive from the city.
But people thought we were mad buying a place when there was still all the unrest. They thought it was so far out. We're at the 9th milestone, and it was very remote in those days. We had to sink a well. We had no water supply. The electricity went off quite frequently. Would people ever come out as far out as this and see us? We had difficulty finding a Chinese armor to come out and work here because it was so far out. And in fact, we became the first Westerners in Hong Kong to employ Filipino maid. Because I went down to the Philippines and interviewed about 8 of them. It's heart-rending. They all wanted to come. They all had, parents who were sick or brothers they wanted to educate. Much the same as today, in fact, but they're all desperate to come. And we have the same family today. We're in our 5th generation of the same Filipino family. So we must be doing something right.
Wow,
The 5th generation of that same family we employed in 1972. And certainly in the 1970s, when there were all many, many immigrants coming in illegally into Hong Kong, following the Cultural Revolution there, the 60s and 70s, our garden seemed to be a conduit. They would come up from Sai Kung over the hill, and if they made it south of Boundary Street, they were allowed to stay in Hong Kong, Boundary Street in Kowloon. So they came here, and they all were trying to get into Kowloon and south of Boundary Street, because if they were picked up by the police then, they were still allowed to stay. So they're all coming in, and the first couple of times we were told we had to phone the police, but actually by the time the police got to us, they were long gone. So we just pointed in the end, that's the way to Kowloon, that way. And they were a very ragged, often barefoot, in open sort of pimsoles, very ragged, desperate, frightened group of people. the illegal immigrants. We had a rush of them in the 60s and 70s following the Cultural Revolution and then the famine in China. And, they were the people who built up Hong Kong. Yeah. So I'm not sure if any of them would ever remember coming through our garden, but that's where, and, they were never threatening, we never worried that they would harm us in any way. They were always astonished to find a Westerner, as you can imagine, if they saw us, and very frightened. But, they were the people who've led to Hong Kong being what it is today.
Yeah. So how was Hong Kong back then? It was like very international or like very Chinese, or how was it? What was the vibe?
Well, I arrived right in the middle of the Cultural Revolution, and people don't appreciate that Hong Kong was very much affected. We had the Red Guards here on the street, we had bombs, we had all this communist schools and banks barricaded. We had big character posters saying imperialists go home. Yeah. It was at a time when people were very uncertain whether the Hong Kong police would be able to hold Hong Kong or not, because the People's Liberation Army came right down to the border, and if they had invaded, I think Hong Kong would have fallen. But China decided, as it always decides, in the fullness of time, they would get back Hong Kong in a more peaceful era, which is what happened. But there was a great uncertainty at that time, and certainly a feeling of danger. If you went out onto the street and saw a cardboard box, for example, on the street, you absolutely called the police. You went nowhere near it because it might be a bomb. Yeah. So I certainly arrived at a rather dramatic time in Hong Kong.
I guess it's quite exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Yes. But it was a sleepy town compared with today, that's for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's become bigger, it's become much more international. It's weathered a lot of storms. It weathered the Cultural Revolution. It weathered many really bad typhoons. It weathered economic collapses, the Asian collapse. It weathered further disturbances in 2019. It's weathered COVID. So I think Hong Kong is a survivor. It's a survivor city for sure.
What would be the way to make friends with Hong Kongers? Is it different versus making friends in England?
No, it's through work, through schools, through neighbours. I think it's very similar, really.
What's the way?
We've had the same neighbours in Blewett Garden since we moved there, and we're on their 5th generation now, actually. From the great-grandfather, grandfather, father, the boy, and now they've got a baby. 5 generations of people next door. Again, it's a very courteous relationship. We go in and visit them at Chinese New Year. We go in and see old grandma, who's now heading for 100, if not 100. Nobody's quite sure. We go and pay our respects to her, and people pay their respects to us, and so it's very harmonious. I think that's the one thing that is really important to Asia, in fact, but certainly Hong Kong, China in particular. They've been through so much turmoil in the last century, China, so much turmoil, being occupied by Japan, and then, having the Cultural Revolution, having major famines. I think there is a appreciation here of stability, which is you don't get as much in Western countries. If you were to ask somebody in rural Scotland, how important to you is a stable society, they would be surprised at that question. Yeah. Well, like, what do you mean, kind of thing. But I think it's very important here that there is a Chinese curse, in fact, that says, may you live in interesting times, because interesting times are very destabilizing and very uncertain. So may you live in interesting times is a curse you put on people, not a challenge or as maybe perceived in Western countries.
Yeah. So I guess it's a different definition of freedom, I guess, in the West,
yes.
In the East. I'm generalizing, but...
Well, freedom from famine. People forget that. They forget how recent, it's within people's lifetime memory that there was a major, following the Cultural Revolution, there was a major famine in China where, millions of people died. And this is embedded in people's psyche. You can't expect it to be otherwise. Just as many people in the West, that people are still traumatized in America by the Vietnam War. And it wasn't even in their country, it was in somebody else's country. But you've still got people who are traumatized by it and remember it, or lost people with it. These things don't disappear for many generations.